Hello, Mr. Regenbrecht. Let's start our talk. My first question would be about the most important issue for Ukraine now. You know, it's a political crisis, and there is a new government expected in Ukraine. Would you please comment on the principal hopes of Germany about this new government to come?
I think key is for Ukraine to overcome the current situation, this crisis, the turbulences that have started in early February of this year. We very much hope that this situation will be overcome quite soon through the formation of a new government, through a cabinet reshuffle based on a solid majority in the Rada in order to continue with the necessary reforms.
Well, speaking about reforms, which is a very important issue as well, how would you comment on the recent developments in reforms in Ukraine, what's been done, and what are your expectations, German expectations in this issue?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's not only about Germany's expectations. I think it's about the expectations of the international community as a whole. Germany, France, the European Union as a whole, other key international partners such as Japan, the United States of America, Canada. So all friends, international partners of Ukraine who stand in support of the necessary reforms and the transformation that the country has to go through. And I think this is also an expectation of the vibrant civil society of this country, of all the young people. And by the way, not only the young people, of the population as a whole, of those who stood in the Maidan 2 years ago in the Revolution of Dignity. I think it is a duty also for us to help Ukraine, to continue help Ukraine to carry forward the necessary reforms. And against that background, our expectation is very clear that we expect key reforms to be continued and to be intensified. Unfortunately, over the past weeks and months, precious time has been lost. I think Ukraine cannot afford to continue to lose time. So we very much hope that a new government will be formed very soon, as I said, based on a solid majority in the Rada to be able to work. And we stand ready to continue help Ukraine, but we have certainly our clear expectations that coincide with the reform program that is ahead of Ukraine.
What are, according to you, the key reforms Ukraine should implement in the first place? I mean, some priority reforms into which sectors, probably energetic sphere or something else?
Yes, judiciary is, of course, extremely important. This is the next step to take. First steps have been taken so far. I think if we take stock of what has been done so far, it is some achievements have been reached indeed. Now the next step is the judiciary, the reform of the judiciary. So it is the last reading of the constitutional reform when it comes to the judiciary. It is the independence of judges, the reform of the whole judicial system, and first of all, of course, the reform of the prosecution. And there we really expect progress not only on the paper, but we want progress from within the prosecution, because we must see to it and we must avoid that any progress and reform within the judiciary is being blocked and prevented from people from within the prosecution. So we need a professional, independent, reformed prosecution that is seriously working and independent from the influence of the politicians. The prosecution is there to prosecute an attack against the law and not to defend particular interests of individual persons. And this is extremely important, and we will have a very, very close look to it that this happens. And linked to that, cross-cutting and overwhelming issue is the fight against corruption. I mean, certainly we had very good declarations of the reform-minded ministers that left the government and that declared no tolerance as to corruption and or zero tolerance when it comes to corruption. And this is something that has to be tackled on all fields. Ukraine has, and that belongs to the achievements, I think, created an anti-corruption bureau in last fall. It has now created the necessary basis and made some appointments on a corruption prevention office. First cases are being followed upon. So, but this can be only the start, and unfortunately we feel the lack of support from the side of the prosecution to these agencies. They can only work effectively if and when they are being supported by the judiciary and by the prosecution in first place. So this has to come together, and these are our very clear expectations. So these are only two elements, but I think this is what the citizens from Ukraine expect, this is what the public expects, this is what the international partners and friends of Ukraine expect.
Speaking about corruption, would you please describe the reaction the publication of Panama Papers and of Ukrainian part of it had in Germany? Because according to these Panama Papers, President of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, is implicated in this scandal.
I would certainly not comment on particular cases. This is up to the discussion in Ukraine. What I would, and the Panama Papers is an aspect of a more broader picture, namely it hints to the need of weakening these structures and of bringing more transparency in international financial flows. I mean, we have seen that with the international financial crisis, the Lehman crisis a couple of years ago. It is key to bring light, to shed light in it, and to improve the basis of taxation for the budgets of the countries in this world. What is key, I think, is to tackle corruption from the root. Ukraine, unfortunately, as you know, occupies the 113th place in the Transparency International Index. It is the worst European country when it comes to corruption. I think Ukraine has every interest to improve its position, and we will do anything to help Ukraine in that, but the will and the political determination to continue and to engage in a more decisive fight against corruption must come from within Ukraine. I think the civil society is very well positioned. You have excellent organizations and people who are watching people that are involved in corrupt structures, and that has to be this has to be translated into, or on the systemic level, meaning that the legal conditions have to be created in order to be able to fight against the corruption in an effective and sustainable way.
Corruption is not the only problem of Ukraine. We know that the war is going on for 2 years already, more than 2 years, and the Minsk Agreements are very much important. Several months ago, in February, we just celebrated, if you can say, 2 years of these Minsk Agreements. We know that not everything is good on this point. Would you comment now what's happening on these Minsk Agreements? What's going on from your point of view?
We have two main points on the agenda. One point or one track is the security track, and the other is the political track. Both tracks are closely intertwined and interlinked, as you know. On the security track, unfortunately, we see the ceasefire becoming more and more fragile. I mean, every person, be it a civilian person or a soldier, hurt, injured or killed is one person too much. And unfortunately we see people killed along the line of contact in the past days and over the past weeks. We see more and more weapons being drawn to the line of contact. We see more and more kinetic and military activities along the line of contact. This must stop. And this must stop as soon as possible. A full and sustainable ceasefire has to be reestablished. The special monitoring mission of the OSCE has put very concrete proposals on the table. The foreign ministers of the Normandy format, who met last in Paris on 3rd of March, had discussed about that. There is an ongoing negotiating process in the trilateral contact group. Some decisions have been taken on demining and on the stop of live fire exercises, but action has to be taken. It's far not enough action that is being implemented on the ground. So our clear expectation is that the politicians, the ministers, the Normandy format has to give and has to provide political guidance to the sides. And the sides have to implement, so militaries of both sides on the ground have to deliver on key issues such as verification of the withdrawal of weapons, such as access, complete unfettered access of the special monitoring mission to each and every place in the security zone, including, of course, in the special regions of the conflict area of the Donetsk and Lugansk oblasts, and including to the border region, the border between Ukraine and Russia, in order to be present everywhere and to be able to do their job. So this is the security side. Without progress on the security side, it will hardly be possible to make progress on the political track. I understand that the political track is not very popular, to put it mildly, in Ukraine, but it is a necessary step to take. Why is it so necessary? Ukraine is well advised to be, as former Prime Minister Yatsenyuk put it, or acting Prime Minister, Yatsenyuk put it.
Still acting, yes.
Of course, as Prime Minister Yatsenyuk put it, to be whiter than white and to deliver on the Minsk Agreements. And certainly when it comes to an issue such as local elections in these regions, certainly everybody knows that under the current circumstances, it would not be realistic to tackle such a process, because simply the security provisions are not there to have free and fair elections on the basis of OSCE standards, on the basis of the law of Ukraine and with international observations. So these are the conditions that are clearly spelled out in the Minsk package of measures. And all these conditions must be met in order to conduct such elections. So the security situation must improve dramatically in order to make these steps. But at the same time,
How to achieve this kind of progress in the security package? It seems it lasts for already 2 years, and we don't see a lot of progress. How do you think we can improve the situation?
It is. I fully agree. I mean, this is our conclusion that we made ourselves. What I can say, we remain and we stay committed. We are in close consultations with all sides. Minister Steinmeier had been in Moscow 2.5 weeks ago. Ministers of the G7, including the French, the German, and the US foreign ministers, have met a couple of days ago in Japan, in Hiroshima, also discussing Ukraine. And we will continue on the Normandy track. But in order for the Normandy track to deliver and to contribute to the process itself, political guidance and political responsibility has to be taken in order to help the sides to make the necessary steps. But it's first and foremost up to the sides, to the conflict parties, to Russia slash pro-Russian forces, the Russian-backed separatists in the Donbass, and to Ukraine to completely fulfill what has been agreed both in Minsk and in the framework of the security working group. And there we have everything on paper, and we have very good agreements. Unfortunately, only a small part of them is being fulfilled. I can only repeat this appeal to the sides first, and second, make it clear that we will do our utmost to use this instrument of Normandy to provide the necessary political guidance. So I think there is no fear for Ukraine to be driven or to be pushed into a political process that might be too early. But in order to be, as Yatsenyuk put it, to be whiter than white, Ukraine would be well advised also to work on that political issues, on these political issues, being aware that nothing would be implemented without having security on the ground.
I see, and probably my last question will be about this political part, and let's talk about the Ukrainian part of responsibility for Minsk process. The Ukrainian government says that it's absolutely ready for implementing Minsk Agreements. I mean, constitutional reform, this election law, decentralization, special status for Donbass, etc. But at the same time, government says that people are not ready, they're not implementing that because society is not ready for that, because people are against this. How would you comment if, as far as I understood you, so security measures have to come first? I mean, this security measures, and then this political part. What do you expect from these political implementations of Minsk process? When should we expect it?
As I said, security first. We have to draw our attention to that. The situation must get under control, also due to humanitarian reasons. We have developed so many good humanitarian initiatives that can be implemented only if security is there. So I would like to repeat that point. This is extremely important. On the political side, a very clear calendar had been agreed upon in Paris in the presence by heads of state and government, in presence of President Poroshenko and President Putin. So the sequence is very clear, which means that we should deliver on a couple of things. I think it would be a good step to think about electoral legislation, special electoral legislation for the Donbass, but having in mind that we need to conduct a couple of preparations security-wise in order to make them possible. So in this time, at that occasion, I would beg your pardon not to be too specific, because we know that currently the internal agenda for Ukraine is on the table. It is key for Ukraine to have a stable government. We wish Ukraine all the best for that, to the president and to all the people involved, to continue to form a stable government and to continue with the reforms. And then we'll sit together and see how we will continue to work on the Minsk agenda.
And the very last question, if I may. Recently, a German newspaper published an investigation about the Russian so-called shadow government for DNR and LNR, about people involved in that in almost all spheres of social life, from roads to schools, infrastructure, etc. It was a kind of very important publication proving, showing document that probably Russia has a kind of plan B for these regions, and that Minsk Agreements are a kind of show for the Western Europe and not a real plan for Russia. So my question will be about the reactions this publication had in Germany, and about, do you think it's serious and it will change in a way the German approach to Minsk talks?
Things are very clear. Heads of state and government supported in a joint declaration on 12th of February the package of measures that had been negotiated before and that is signed by the members of the trilateral contact group, including by representatives of the so-called specific areas of the Donetsk and Lugansk regions of Ukraine. So it is extremely evident and extremely clear that both sides took obligations, and I do not speculate in any things that are going on the ground in the so-called People Republics, which are part of Ukraine. We are very keen to support the territorial integrity of Ukraine, by the way, including Crimea. Sometimes we tend to forget, about Crimea, and it's very close to the heart of Angela Merkel, who says we must continue to shed light on the situation in Crimea and to recall this is Ukraine, this is not Russia. So I think this is also very important. So obligations are there on the table, and we will measure Russia's behavior on the or against the delivery on the implementation of each and every 13 articles of the Minsk package of measures. And this will be also a very important measuring stick, as you know, for the question of sanctions. I just recall the decision of the European Council of March of last year, and I refer to the current declaration of foreign ministers in Hiroshima this Monday, if I'm not mistaken, where this context is being made crystal clear as well. So this is on the table. This is our roadmap, and we will be guided by that. So there's no other game in town. Minsk and its implementation, including by Moscow, of course.
Thank you very much for an extremely interesting talk.
Дякую.